All right, guys, it's time. You know it, I know it. I have to do some sourdough bread. The from scratch body should really be the place where you learn how to do sourdough, right? Because sourdough is basically bread or anything that you bake with it without using commercial yeast. You literally create your own yeast. And for anyone who watches my channel a lot, if you subscribe to me, you know that I love baking bread and I've done it up until now using commercial yeast. There's nothing wrong with that. I continue to do that. But I think that for our bodies, it's really interesting to look at, fermentation, all this stuff that comes out about how fermented food seems to be really good for us. And I'm sure that it is individual and it might not be for everybody, but with sourdough, you are basically harnessing the natural yeast that lives in everything around us. There's yeast everywhere. And commercial yeast is only, they've taken the strains of the yeast that are the most effective and just really honed in on those. And so it's very safe in that sense because you know that it's going to do that job every time. It's not going to be so sensitive to all the elements around us. But that's not to say that we can't create our own yeast, and that's what you do. With sourdough, I've been shying away from it because I've had in my head that it's really complicated, that you have to, be given a starter by somebody else that you then continue, and you have to have this living starter in your home that you give a name and all this kind of like cult-like stuff that comes with sourdough. But doing a bit more research into it, I've actually found it all really, really interesting. But I want to be super open about how much of a novice I am when it comes to this. And so I'm here to start my first sourdough starter in front of you guys. And I would love for you guys to join me. So without getting into too much technical stuff about this, I've already said this, yeast lives all around us. When you make a starter, you are harnessing that yeast, you are developing that yeast yourself. We have yeast on our skin, in the air, like everything has yeast basically in it, living bacteria that we can use. And when you make sourdough bread or anything else with sourdough, you don't need commercial yeast at all because you've created your own, but you do need a starter. Without it, you can't do anything sourdough. So we're starting one right now. The process takes about 7 to sometimes up to 14 days. Usually after about 7 days, hopefully we'll have a starter. But I'm going to do this, and I'm doing a proper video now to introduce this, to invite you guys to join me if this is something that you've kind of been scared to do like me. And today is day number 1. We are starting the starter. And every day now, up until I have a healthy living starter that I can use to bake bread, I'm going to put up a short from that day and what I've done, when I've fed it, if I've had any issues, anything that's come up, and then hopefully they'll be helpful for you guys to follow me as well. So I want to say a massive thank you to the Clever Carrot, which is the website where I was learning tons about starting your first starter when you're completely green. So using that and kind of adapting it a little bit to what I think is going to work for me, I'm going to, without further ado, I just feel like this is a big moment. Without further ado, I'm going to start my starter. I have here roughly 60 grams of wholemeal flour or whole wheat flour. Same thing, depends on where you're from. They're celebrating me out on the streets. And then I'm adding 60 grams roughly, that's 1/3 of a cup. On the Clever Carrot it says 1/4 of a cup, but I've actually found that I think 1/3 of a cup is closer. This is warm water. And then mixing that together. That is the beginning of my starter, guys. This is what it looks like. I think you're gonna have to help me name it at some point, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Hopefully this one will live, and I'm gonna close this lid and I'm gonna put it somewhere quite nice and warm. The kitchen is very warm today because I've been shooting loads of videos and cooking tons of stuff, but I know that keeping it away from fruit just to kind of save you that mistake. Keeping it away from fruit can be good. Some people say that they keep it in a different room to the kitchen because actually there's quite a lot of stuff in the kitchen that can make it go moldy. And obviously when you keep something at room temperature that's moist and has water in it, there is definitely a chance of something going moldy, and we want to avoid that because if it does go moldy, you are going to have to start again. I don't really feel like I have a room in the house where I want to have my starter that isn't the kitchen. However, I'm going to put it in a cupboard away from any food. So I've got a cupboard here, just behind me, that only has pots and pans in it. And I know that the sun kind of hits this cupboard in the morning, so it's definitely going to be quite nice and warm. So I'm going to keep it in there. That's all you do on day one. 60 grams of wholemeal flour and 60 grams of water, warm water. I would recommend that you don't use tap water unless you know that your tap water is really nice and clean. I live in London, so the tap water has quite a few nasties in it, so I use a water filter. So I've just used filtered water and I've warmed it up. I boiled it and then let it cool down basically. So you want warm water, but maybe try and avoid using it straight from the tap if you can avoid it. Filtered water is probably better to avoid getting those nasties into your starter. But I really hope that you'll join me on this journey. I'll share my experience with you, but I'm pretty clueless at this point, so I'm hoping to learn from it, and I can't wait to start doing some sourdough recipes for you guys when I get really experienced and familiar with it. So thank you for watching, and keep checking out my shorts. They'll be coming up every day starting from tomorrow, and I wish you all the best with your sourdough starter.